Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ. The Uncommon Good, live from Iowa Catholic Radio's Mercy Live Up Studios.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
This is Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you live from all across America. I am Bo Bonner, director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation Ethics and Leadership and the director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Science here in Des Moines, Iowa. You can find us at zetainstitute.com and mchs.edu. Bud Marr out there in Pittsburgh. Bud, what are you doing out there?
Director of the National Institute for Newman Studies. You can find us at newmanstudies.org.
And also, you know, it just happened to be really recently here, Newman's feast day. So did you guys have quite a lot going on?
Well, we actually get the day off on Newman's feast day, so
nice.
Italian Catholics are really proud of us for taking that extra step to honor Blessed Newman. And hopefully this is one of the last feast days we have to call him blessed, and maybe his canonization is around the corner.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, so, Bud, I don't know what weather's like out with you guys, but yesterday was a first for the Bonner family. Both the Bonners in Oklahoma and Iowa had to go to the basement and seek shelter because of tornado warnings on the same day, so that was pretty cool.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I've been watching the news about this hurricane that's approaching the Gulf Coast. It's been an eventful weather season.
Yeah, what's crazy about that one, like the other hurricane they talked about for like weeks on end, but this one, they really, I mean, it didn't pop up completely out of the blue, but it just didn't seem to have the buildup, and it sounds like it might be worse.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories on air about which weather events get the most media coverage, but yeah, this one seemed to kind of, hey, he's coming through the back door. Michael.
Yeah.
Hurricane Michael.
And I would throw out that maybe, like if you're approaching D.C., you might get more air coverage than the panhandle of Florida. But like you said, no conspiracy theories needed. I know that someone who was just on the show a while ago, Haley Stewart, they have a lot of family down that way, and my family knows people on the panhandle. So here's a prayer to everybody being safe that's in the path of Hurricane Michael. And I'd have to say, we had all these tornadoes. I think there was a little bit of damage in Oklahoma, maybe some in Iowa, but not too bad. So what's the weather doing up in Pittsburgh?
You know what? I'm trying not to complain, but it's been a really warm, unseasonably warm fall. When I moved to Pittsburgh, I had in my mind sort of like just red, yellow, orange foliage and knit sweaters and those sorts of things, but we could still rock shorts today if we wanted to.
Oh, wow. I think it's been hotter up there than Iowa then.
Yeah.
And also don't rock shorts. I would suggest the pants.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as always, brought to you by Cartridge World. I think, for instance, if you need to keep track of all the weird weather and all the places it's coming up, because you speak of that it's warm in Pittsburgh. I just got a twit, or whatever you call them. It's snowing in Goodland, Kansas. So,
wow.
Yeah, and there's a hurricane, and then there was an earthquake in Oklahoma and tornadoes, and it snowed in the panhandle of Oklahoma yesterday. So we might need to, quite a bit of printer cartridge ink to keep track of all the weather events going on.
Well, whenever it gets to be this time of year, I think of our friends at Cartridge World. Joe and his family are huge Kansas Jayhawk fans.
Right.
So I know they always look forward to November.
Because of basketball.
But I guess as a Husker fan, I don't know. I don't know what sport I'm looking forward to these days. Women's volleyball.
Yeah. 801 73rd Street, Windsor Heights, if you need to print out a consolation card. Consoling Bud for the state of Nebraska sports. And then, as always, brought to you by Mercy College of Health Science. The big one, Bud, is we are having our Faith and Healing speaker series, the first of the year, October 18th, which is next week on Thursday, starting at 6 o'clock. We have wonderful hors d'oeuvres to serve beforehand. The speaker is Dr. May Sim. She is a former professor of mine at Oklahoma State. She's now at Holy Cross. She wrote her dissertation under Alistair McIntyre. Yeah. If you're a dork, you probably know what that means, Alistair McIntyre, but suffice it to say, man, maybe the most important English-speaking Catholic ethicist alive still, Bud? Nearly up there? It's arguable, right?
Yeah, no, I would say maybe like the top three greatest philosophers alive.
And so she studied under him when he was briefly at Vanderbilt. But her specialty, like she wrote an entire book comparing Aristotle and Confucius. So she sort of has her hand in both the East and Western philosophical worlds. So she's going to talk about health, both East and West, primarily talking about people who show an indifference to health. So in the West, we usually think of that as the Stoics. The Chinese philosophers have a sort of correspondence as well. Like I said, Thursday, October 18th at Mercy College of Health Science here in downtown Des Moines, 6 to 7:30. We'd really love to have you out, and they always underwrite our show, so we always try to make a big push to try to get you guys there.
Well, I was there for the Faith and Healing series when it first got off the ground, and I think you've really taken it to new heights. But for all our listeners out there, I would really encourage this event. You know, it's a great opportunity to hear really high-quality speakers, but what I always found nice about it is sometimes with an event, for me, it's like how complicated is it going to be to pull off?
Right.
And that time of day, traffic's not bad on 235.
Right.
The parking lot is right off the interstate, so you can find a nice, easy spot close to the building and then get hors d'oeuvres in the process.
That's right. And knowing how the weather should be, I mean, I'm going to lay down the money and say there probably won't be tornadoes, but it might, like, snow and be 58 degrees with how weather's going. So what a better time than to come indoors at the Sullivan Center at Mercy College of Health Science. Well, Bud, we have as our guest today another Uncommon Good All-Star, but he hasn't been here for a while. He was one of our first guests when we had our first run. Gabriel Sanchez, editor for Angelus Press. But particularly for today, he's also an attorney for the Maul Law Group in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're going to be talking about debt. Gabriel really lately has been using his law services to help people who are in debt. And debt actually plays a huge role in the New Testament, in the history of Catholic social teaching, and particularly what it means to set prisoners free. So when we get back, we're going to talk with Gabriel about his work and what sort of implications that has for Catholic social teaching in the here and now. So this is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back. Stick around after these messages. Stick around. But I don't always, I can't guess what people will find controversial or not. I'm imagining that, like, debt can be sort of an itchy topic, so I'm hoping that people use the zip whip line. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150. Have any complaints? Please use the zip whip line. But even joking more than that, less than complaints if you have questions, because I think this is something that should hit home to a lot of people, and there's a lot for that the church actually has to say, and we would love to hear your questions and field them, especially. I don't want to say we have a lawyer on the line. I think that might be trademarked, but on the air is a lawyer. He can't give you straight-out legal advice because he's in a different jurisdiction, but he does know a lot, especially about people who are dealing with debt. So, have any questions? Zip whip line? There we go. 515-223-1150, 515-223-1150, hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good. We'll be back after these messages.
Impoverished children break everyone's heart, but poverty seems like such a big problem. What can one person do to make a difference? For 17 years, Blessman International's passion has been to connect the resources of our donors with sustainable programs that impact the lives of impoverished children in South Africa. Our donors are feeding thousands of hungry children every week, providing basic water and sanitation for impoverished communities, and sharing the love of God in practical ways every day. Go to www.blessmaninternational.org and make your donation today. Is it time for a new roof? Then it could be time for you to get to know Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a roofing company entering its 30th year of business. They specialize in residential re-roofs, light commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494.
Support for the Uncommon Good is provided by Cartridge World. Cartridge World is an industry leader delivering high-performance printing products that help you save time, money, and print great.
Perfect for businesses, home offices, college students, or busy moms trying to find affordable printing supplies including ink, toner, paper, or printers. For business customers, pickup and delivery are available. Products are guaranteed or full replacement.
Cartridge World, your low-cost, environmentally friendly printing experts, 801 73rd Street in Windsor Heights, 515-564-7400, and online at cartridgeworld.com. Thank you to Mercy College of Health Sciences, downtown Des Moines, for underwriting our show, The Uncommon Good, with me, Bo Bonner.
And I'm Bud Marr. A degree from Mercy College provides endless possibilities. Students have access to patients with complex medical conditions, state-of-the-art medical facilities, highly motivated healthcare professionals, and classroom professors that transform them into servant leaders.
You can start the programs in fall, spring, or summer. There are endless possibilities available online at mchs.edu/kwky. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. We're back with you here to talk to another all-star that we've had on the show before, Gabriel Sanchez, editor of Angelus Press and attorney for the Maul Law Group in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Gabriel, how you doing?
Not too bad. How are you two?
Not too bad. I see on Twitter you're going to live tweet rather than talk to us. I don't know if that would work out, man.
No, it's okay. I will talk. I'll participate.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, so I'm sorry that I saw this like 5 seconds before we went on air, and I was like, "This is pretty funny." So, Gabriel, last time you were on, it was a while ago. We've had you talk about all sorts of different things, Eastern and Western differences in the church, for instance. But today we want to talk about a second aspect of what you do in your life. You're an editor at Angelus Press, but you're also one of them lawyers. And, the plenty of country songs have warned us about lawyers and trusting backwoods, southern ones, and whatnot. You're from the North, so presumably you're a trustworthy lawyer. Sorry for making the Reba McEntire reference. But I think it's interesting. You can do all sorts of things with law. You go to copyright law. I think early in your career you did aviation law. What got you back into law, and particularly what sort of practice are you practicing at right now?
Well, I suppose what got me back into it was sort of an accident. I had started to do a little bit of side work maybe 2 or 3 years ago with legal aid here in Grand Rapids. There's actually a legal aid office in our courtroom downtown. And a lot of people who go to legal aid obviously don't have a lot of money. And so what they tried to provide to them were sort of do-it-yourself kits for different types of law, like whether you're being trying to get a divorce, if you have some sort of civil proceeding against you. But one thing that interested me were people who are being sued by debt collectors or the attorneys that they hire. So these are people who tend to be typically low income, and they have a fair amount of consumer debt. And so what they'll get in the mail is a complaint from a credit card well, usually it's not a credit card company, it's actually probably a debt buyer. And it will allege all these things saying that, they have the right to pursue the debt, you owe this much. But there's very little information given. And the tendency, and this is actually a nationwide statistic, the tendency in 98% of these types of lawsuits is for the consumer to just not hire an attorney. And only in 80% of the lawsuits does a consumer even bother to push back against it. So what I tried to do is come up with some sort of self-help kits for people to, at least answer the complaint against them and try to defend themselves. But what I started to find out, of course, is that even with a sort of a self-help kit and even with really specific instructions about the type of questions you should ask the other side about whether or not they can properly sue on the debt, if the statute of limitations is passed, and so forth, is that a lot of these debt collectors and the attorneys they hire would use a lot of unscrupulous means to still collect the debt, file fraudulent documents with the court, lie to the person that they're suing about the legal status of the debt, so on and so forth. And so I started to get interested in actually starting to represent these people. And so that's basically what I do. I mean, broadly speaking, I'm a consumer attorney, but really I would say 90% of what I do is focused on defending people who are being sued for commercial debt.
Now, what's interesting about this, right, is, we warned this at the top of the show, there's people who could maybe get the wrong impression about why people are in debt and like what that means, and well, if you owe something, don't you need to pay it? What starts to be interesting, right, is a lot of our modern society, if you have the means to do so, it's not even a second thought to like ask a lawyer to legally defend you in some way. A lot of people, company-wise, for instance, it's not seen as sort of like sinister or trying to get out of stuff to say like, oh, okay, well, you have a side, I have a side, we'll get our lawyers and they'll hash things out. But when it comes to individuals, especially poor people, sometimes it seems easy for people to make all sorts of judgments about them. But I think anybody who's ever found themselves in some sort of realm of what you're talking about, where you get a packet of legalese and you don't know what to do, it's hard for the common person to go get a lawyer to simply sort out what's going on. I know that the diocese gets into this when it comes to issues about wills and power of attorney. People want to do like the good Catholic thing when they're approaching their final days, but they try to do it themselves, and it's just this miasma of crazy legal terms. What I think I hear from you, right, is if we're going to be honest about helping people out, we're going to have people who can find their way around the room when it comes to all of this legal talk.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that you have to consider, too, I know there's probably a presumption out there that says, well, if you owe a debt, you should pay a debt. But keep in mind, too, is that when it comes to commercial debt, like credit card debt, even medical debt, student loan debt, a lot of times what happens is these banks or other debt holders, they sell off the debt for pennies on the dollar to these large national debt collection companies who in turn might even sell off that debt a second or third time before they actually bother to invoke an attorney to collect on it. And during that whole point of time, paperwork gets lost, fees and interest gets tacked on, which may not comply with state or federal law. There might not even be a record of assignment. In other words, a record to demonstrate who actually owns the debt and who has the right to sue on it. And this is a problem that comes up in several of the cases I'm handling right now, where somebody gets sued on a debt that they are sure they've already paid, and they have paid it, except when they paid the debt maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they paid it to an assigner who then turned around and sold off the debt again. So this becomes a real problem, and I think the real challenge that a lot of people have, and even myself as a lawyer representing them, is to convince judges that, there's a reason why we have a whole process. If you're going to use the courts, if you're going to use the machinery of the judiciary to collect on a debt, then there are certain things you need to prove. There are certain steps you need to take. At the same time, too, there are certain sort of behaviors that are deemed illegal or unconscionable, and we have laws to protect people. One law in particular is the Federal Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which limits or actually is supposed to prevent unlawful and unconscionable means to collect debts. And what that does is that, one, it protects consumers, but two, at the same time, too, for the debt collectors who are out there, and sadly they're rare, but the debt collectors that are out there that actually follow the law, that treat people with respect, that don't lie or try to deceive them to collect the debt or try to publicly embarrass them, it's supposed to help protect them as well so that they're not sort of undermined by unscrupulous debt collectors who can gain an unlawful and unfair competitive advantage over them.
Gabriel, maybe this goes without saying, but for listeners who are listening in and they wonder how this connects to Catholic social teaching or the themes of our show, why are the matters that you're talking about why should they be such a concern for Catholics? Because I guess the way that many Americans will approach some of these topics is we've got the market and we've got sort of the gears of the economic system, and people enter freely into that system, and they sort of know the risk that they're taking. Are we just griping about profits here? Could you speak to some of the theological issues at stake?
Well, I think the first doctrinal issue that's at stake is that usury should be illegal. It's immoral. It's been condemned by the church. It's been condemned going all the way back to the Greek philosophers, including Aristotle. We've taken it as being sort of part of our economic order at the moment, and we take it as sort of everyday and normative. But I think at a fundamental level, there is something wrong with it. And even if you want to say that there should be some sort of a reasonable amount of interest charged on certain types of loan because of risk that's involved, keep in mind, too, some of my clients, these are people who may have taken out a payday loan, and payday loans come attached with through-the-roof interest rates, and a small payday loan of $200-$300 if they're late on making a payment, all of a sudden starts ballooning to thousands of dollars. And these are people who already can't afford it anyways. I think there's also a sort of a larger macro issue here, which is that if you go back to the encyclical Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII, he talks about paying workers just wages. Now, of course, there's always been a debate, what is a just wage? But sort of a general consensus that has come out of, let's say, the writings of John Mackay and Thomas Stork and some other Catholic social commentators, is that just wage to allow an individual, for example, a husband, to be able to provide for his family, build up savings without having to rely on things like transfer payments from the government or have to rely on high interest lending from a bank, for instance. In other words, people should be paid a just wage to, in order to buy a home, but not have to rely on a mortgage, which of course is going to tack on fees, interest, and other sorts of costs. Unfortunately, we don't live in that society. And so I think from a Catholic social perspective, I'm very skeptical of the types of fees and interest that get applied to these types of loans, and more importantly, how they're collected. I mean, we still have a sense that people should be treated fairly and justly, that they should not be publicly embarrassed. And let me tell you, too, when I'm talking about these debt collectors and their behavior, I have seen everything. In fact, I have everything going on from debt collectors for hospitals who will take people's private medical information and staple it to the public record and file it in court because it will embarrass them. Mm-hmm. I have debt collectors who have attempted to get, I had a couple who the husband died and they had, they bought a cemetery plot with 2 plots. Well, they attempted to try to put a lien on the second cemetery plot because they claimed that they had a property interest.
Oh my gosh, that's like Halloween bad. Oh my, wow.
It's terrible. It's utterly terrible. So again, I'm not sitting here saying people shouldn't pay their bills, but at the same time, too, if you really get to look at the system and how debt is collected in this country, it's completely abysmal. And unfortunately, there's not enough lawyers out there doing debtor defense.
Okay, I need to be talking on the radio show here, but I'm just still contemplating the idea that they put a lien on a grave plot. That is Flannery O'Connor Southern Gothic insane. Goodness gracious! So let me talk with Bud and to Bud's point and sort of circle back around.
Yeah.
When we think about Jesus talking about what would he have to say about modern debt collection, there's 2 big points to make, and we'll make one before the break, and then we'll make one afterwards. One is when you hear Jesus constantly talk about setting prisoners free. This one can sound weird to us. We think, like, is Jesus just saying, like, hey, let the guy who got in a knife fight at a bar out. But actually, in the ancient world, the most people were in jail was because of debt. Like, debtor's prison was probably the biggest group of people in prison was people who couldn't pay their debts. And of course, in the ancient world, this starts to be usurious and sinful because, of course, what can't you do while you're in prison but work to then pay off your debt, so your debts would accrue even more. So when Jesus starts saying, set the prisoners free, it's true that he might be talking about all sorts of prisoners, but a lot of scholars point out that what clearly the people that he's talking to in his day and age would think of first is debtor's prison, that people who are in debtor's prison should be set free. Now, we don't have debtor's prison so-called, but Gabriel, I think what you're talking about is, if not its own version of debtor's prison, maybe in some ways worse.
I think in some ways worse, but I suppose I would add in the caveat that even though debtor's prison has technically been abolished here in the United States, it still does exist. For instance, someone who gets sued on a debt from a credit card company, let's say they default on the lawsuit. In other words, never answer it, so they get a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 judgment against them. Well, then a lot of times what the attorneys will do is they'll hold what's called a creditor's exam. In other words, they will summon you to court and make you, swear in open court about your assets, your bank account, where you work, and so on and so forth. Well, a lot of people try to avoid the debt collection lawsuit, so they don't know what they're being served with. They throw it away. Same thing, too, when they get a summons to come to court for a creditor's exam. And then what ends up happening is that the attorneys will turn around and say, Your Honor, they haven't shown up. Now they need to be held in contempt. And actually a bench warrant can be issued for their arrest. So, yes, you can still actually go to prison, or go to jail at least, for having a debt. And I've seen that happen. I've had clients that's happened to. So it's not gone. It's still part of our reality today.
I mean, to go back to basics, Gabriel, so for me, this whole topic is interesting because most of my scholarly work has been done on John Henry Newman. And so there's a lot of conversations on the internet about is what the church teaches and sort of like its changing tone on usury. Is this an example of development of doctrine? And I think there's confusion there even around this question. I guess to get back to first principles, why historically has the church condemned usury? Why was this seen as so problematic?
Well, because you're attempting to collect on something you're not owed. I mean, it goes back to, like I said, it goes back to the time of Aristotle. And again, it was just typically seen as something that it wasn't even, I put it this way, it wasn't even questioned for centuries and centuries. And it really isn't until the more modern era in the last few hundred years that you start to see some allowance for usury and some exceptions being carved out there. Now, of course, if you go back to, let's say, the Byzantine Empire, there was some allowance to add interest on certain types of loans if they're high risk. For instance, shipping. If you're going to do shipping and shipping of goods, there's a good chance that maybe these goods get lost at sea or something of that nature, and therefore it was seen that, okay, you can get some some interest put on the loan for the risk that you're taking. Obviously, in this day and age of interest rates, if I loan somebody $200 today and they don't pay it back for 5 years, well, that $200 isn't the same as it was today because of interest rates. So maybe there's some recompense there. But as far as, loaning somebody $500 and then saying, well, you're going to owe me 50, 60% on top of what I just loaned you. I mean, today we would want to call that loan sharking, but actually it goes on all the time in payday loan centers. And again, it's something that was considered deeply immoral and condemned by the church. And unfortunately, the church sort of started turning a blind eye towards it in the last couple of 100 years because of social and political pressure.
Well, I think it starts to be interesting, too, to think about the history of that, not to geek out and go too deep into it, but to show you that even what we would consider mundane, everyday things used to come under the purview of theology. There were huge arguments about could we even have something like insurance, right? So shipping, like you said, is this sort of historical moment where people start going, well, shouldn't I be able to put some sort of insurance on my part in case the boat sinks? And then there were these big debates were you betting against providence, right? Were you standing to make a benefit if God chose to sink the boat and all these things? And then eventually it gets sort of hashed out that, well, if you do health insurance, right? If we all decide to pay into a pool together so that we can help each other out because we have more money together to help each other out than we don't, blah, blah, blah. They start figuring these things out. There's ways to sort of slice this problem in fine distinctions that, like you said, none of us here are talking about doing away completely with loans, or even the idea of that there's some mechanisms for which people who loan money can have insurance, so to speak, on it. But payday loan centers, let's start with something easy. People who are advertising and preying on people in their worst need and then making a sort of a percentage that someone could never feasibly pay. I just don't. I'm with you. I look at those and I just wonder how they can even be legal. To me, it's not much different than selling certain sort of drugs, to be honest.
I agree with you. And again, a lot of these things are regulated at a certain level, but the problem is that people don't know their rights. And I think that's another reason why we need more attorneys out there who do consumer protection, just to let people know, hey, this is what they can do, this is what they can charge, this is what your rights are in case certain behaviors are going on. And unfortunately, that information just isn't readily available. Sure, somebody can go on Google and try to Google stuff, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, there's even websites that are actually run by creditors and debt collectors that try to say, oh, no, these are your rights under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, or these are your rights under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. And they're just fraudulent. They're wrong. But they post those things up there because people will find them and go, oh, okay, I guess when they robo-dial my cell phone 40 times a day, that's not illegal. Okay. That kind of nonsense.
Yeah, no, that is. And I think that starts to be one thing that we can ask as Christians is, if this is something that we have a long history of speaking about, I can start to understand where people think oh, you guys are one or two issue groups of people. You only think about this along party lines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When people start saying, can't we sort of cross the aisle and do something together, I don't see how anyone... There's no political ideology, it seems to me, that should be willing to allow people to break laws we currently have, much less the big discussion, like you said, that we're going to have about usury in the history of the church. But if there's people posting fraudulent information on the internet to hope to catch people in a snare to make them pay money they don't need to, I don't even understand how this is sort of a partisan issue at all.
No, it's not a partisan issue. And actually, if you look at some of the support for consumer legislation that began in the 1970s, it actually was bipartisan in nature. Sure, maybe Republicans came at it more from a protect the market kind of standpoint, and while Democrats came at it from a protect the consumer type of standpoint. But there was a convergence. Unfortunately, because of our polarized political system right now, we're not seeing that same level of convergence. And actually, a lot of these consumer protection laws, like I mentioned before, the FDCPA and the TCPA, they're very old, and so the remedies that they allow for are not adequate to dissuading large creditors or large debt collectors from engaging in illegal practices. Unfortunately, the courts has kind of eroded some of these protections, and even more unfortunately, Congress is not really in a position to step in and say, okay, well, we need to update these statutes in order to take account of the different environment that we live in today with, the internet being sort of now used as a means to collect a debt on top of a telephone and on top of, letters in the mail.
Well, this has been fantastic. We're going to a break, Gabriel. When we get back, we'll dive back into some of the history of this and how this is intertwined deeply in our understanding of what Jesus said in the Catholic faith. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back after these messages. Folks, if you want to keep up with us, social media is always a great way to do it. On Facebook, if you go to Iowa Catholic Radio, you can like us, follow everything that's going on, and hear from us throughout the week. Our Twitter handle is at IA Catholic Radio. So we're not live tweeting as it goes along, but that's one way that you can see what's going on. We have our bi-weekly email. Staying in tune, like Bud likes to point out, there's an easy way in which you can look, find what you want to do, and even register while you're there. And then also you can keep up with what's happening throughout the diocese throughout the week. You can see what programs we have. You can just keep in touch. So again, Facebook, Iowa Catholic Radio, Twitter, at IA Catholic Radio, and then you can go to iowacatholicradio.com, listen to streaming broadcasts, and sign up for our newsletter. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back with Bud Marr and Gabriel Sanchez here after the break on The Uncommon Good.
Everyone lives their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. How we use that time directly affects if our life will leave a significant impact or not. Every year, Blessman International leads teams of Central Iowans on 12-day, all-inclusive experiences filled with life-changing personal interaction with the beautiful African children that we serve. Teams are forming now for 2019. Space is limited, so make a decision today to use your time to do something significant in the life of an African child. Learn more and apply for a trip today at www.blessmaninternational.org.
For the last decade, the Des Moines Diocese has come to know and love Bishop Richard E. Pates. While all good things must come to an end, it's time to celebrate. Join us on Sunday, October 14th, as we say farewell to Bishop Pates and in celebration of his 50th anniversary of priestly ordination. Mass will be at 4 p.m. at St. Ambrose Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Catholic Pastoral Center. For more information, contact Adam Story at 515-237-5056. It's time to celebrate with Bishop Pates.
Support for The Uncommon Good is provided by Cartridge World. Cartridge World is an industry leader delivering high-performance printing products that help you save time, money, and print great.
Perfect for businesses, home offices, college students, or busy moms trying to find affordable printing supplies including ink, toner, paper, or printers. For business customers, pickup and delivery are available. Products are guaranteed or full replacement.
Cartridge World, your low-cost, environmentally friendly printing experts, 801 73rd Street in Windsor Heights, 515-564-7400, and online at cartridgeworld.com.
Hi, this is Tony Calumet. Our next Man Up event is coming up Tuesday night, November 13th from 5:20 until 8 p.m. at All Saints Catholic Church here in Des Moines. It's going to be moderated by Father Sean Kilcawley, who is a nationally recognized speaker on theology of the body, human love, and pornography addiction. Father currently serves at the Diocese of Lincoln and brings hope and healing to individuals, spouses, parents, and clergy who have been affected by pornography. Don't miss this one. Register today at iowacatholicradio.com.
We're back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We have with us Gabriel Sanchez, editor for Angelus Press and an attorney for the Maul Law Group in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Gabriel, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the thing that we are talking about is debt in general, debt in the ways in which Gabriel, as a lawyer, has had the chance to try to advocate on behalf of people who are suffering through this. How does this have to do with church teaching and everything like this? One thing that I like to bring up, Gabriel, is when people think like debt is some sort of like mere modern fact of modern life, or is something that we don't need to really consider, or doesn't have a lot to say, church social teaching. I find it interesting, right, that when Jesus and the entire history and theology of the Jewish people want to come up with an idea, a great way to talk about sin, they talk about debt. And it's interesting, right? So like one of the books I'm thinking of is Gary Anderson's fantastic book, Sin, A History, where he talks about this sort of evolution of talking about sin as a debt, and a debt in which the death of Jesus allows us to break free from. There's a way in which people think that the way we would heal religion is to talk about economics less. But when we look to what our Lord says, there's a way in which all of these things about like how we have a relationship with each other, how we have a relationship with God, are intertwined with at least economic metaphors. Do you... this is a weird question. Do you see this in your work, that there's a way in which if you want to talk about sin in a concrete way, not just as some sort of abstraction in a sermon, that your work dealing with people, dealing with debts, is a sort of way to see that in the flesh?
It's a weird question. It's a difficult one. I mean, I suppose when I approach the issue of defending people who are being sued or people who have just been wronged by creditors or debt collectors, I try to look at it less from a perspective of saying, well, these are bad people. These are people who've made poor choices. These are people, and some of them have, and they'll admit it. It's always very startling to me when I have clients who will sit there and say, I had a drug problem, I had an alcohol problem, I went through a really bad divorce, so many other various things in their lives, and it's led them to a sort of poor financial situation. But my clients, generally speaking, are trying to get out of it. Maybe their debt isn't so bad as they need to file for bankruptcy and start over, but, because they still have a lot of things they want to hold on to, house, car, a place for their children to live. But one thing it makes me realize is that even the best positioned person, even somebody who actually tries to do everything right, follow the rules, you can still make a mistake. And yeah, we understand that you make a mistake, you're supposed to, a sin, for instance, you're supposed to repent and then amend your life and go forward. Well, some of these people try to amend their lives and they can't keep going forward because they keep being burdened and slogged down with this. And so I suppose for me as a Christian, it's put me in a mode to be less judgmental, less presumptuous about why people are in the situations that they're in. Not to sit there and look down my nose at somebody and say, oh, well, they're carrying a bunch of debt or something like that. That's because they're automatically a bad person. There's a lot of people out there who do a lot of terrible things and prosper, and a lot of people who try to do things right and who suffer. And coming to a realization of that and really seeing it every day in the type of work I do, it's a humbling experience, but also pushes me to a position to really examine my own choices, my own life, my own finances. I'll tell you right now, I'm scared to death to have a credit card. I don't have one. I try not to borrow. I try not to do any of this stuff because, quite frankly, I've seen how it can really mess with people's lives and with their ability to not only take care of themselves, but take care of their families. And it's really, like I said, a humbling and very startling experience.
And the only thing I want to point out is, and maybe I just asked the question bad, to me the interesting thing is, like you said, people make mistakes. Even beyond the church, like America's supposed to believe in second chances and things like this. The insidious thing to me is not that people make mistakes. Of course we all do. The weird thing is to make a profit off of other people's mistakes, or even sort of like gear your business towards people's mistakes. In fact, you do better the more mistakes they make. And the more that you can pile up their mistakes on top of them, you can start to understand how, like, the devil as someone who, like, constantly asks us to repay our debts becomes a trope in the early church. Because it's one thing to sin, but it's another to benefit off of someone else's sin. And I think that's why debt becomes such a powerful metaphor for our Lord. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Actually, what I was thinking was related to the last point Gabriel was making about his own life, and I hope this isn't too far out of your wheelhouse, Gabriel, but I guess for myself, it's easy to personally look at debt collectors or even bankers and sort of, have a kind of negative image. But for myself, working in higher education, the schools that I've worked for, they've set up a retirement plan for us, and I've wondered, have you thought through or looked into even, I guess when those letters come in the mail, I don't even really look closely at them. But in some way, is there a material cooperation in the kind of, sometimes in the investing that we do, or how are those two interrelated?
Well, that's a topic I've certainly seen debated in other circles as far as, right, if you enter into a retirement program and the type of companies that the retirement program might invest in, what sort of moral baggage does that tend to carry? And I think it's worth reflecting on. Unfortunately, we live in a society and an economic system which doesn't give us a whole lot of options. I mean, optimally, we would have these, Catholic-based retirement plans that would only invest in, good businesses, moral businesses, things that don't violate natural divine law, but we don't live in that particular society, unfortunately. I mean, for me, I jokingly say this sometimes. My retirement plan is to die, so I don't really look beyond. I'm kidding. I don't plan on dying anytime soon, but I don't. I actually am very. Maybe I sound a little far afield here, but I'm very skeptical of any type of typical retirement plan that's out there because I simply disagree with what they invest in, and I have very strongly adverse opinions about capitalism. I mean, it was a joke that I made a couple of weeks ago at the State Bar Association. We had our consumer law meeting, and everyone kind of went around the room and said, why do you do consumer laws? One said, well, I believe in social justice. I believe in helping people. That's great. I love that thing. They looked at me and they said, well, why do you do it? I just looked at them and said, well, I hate capitalism.
Yeah, you probably made a lot of friends. This is the point where I should blame all of this on you being Ukrainian, right? No, I'm joking.
I'm only half.
Only half Ukrainian. No, I'm teasing. I think what starts to be another way to to ask these questions when you think about the modern world and how, as Christians, we relate to it. We can be pithy and make jokes about whatever we want to that's bothering us, but we go back and we ask, how is this grounded in some of the things that Jesus said? And we get the idea, right, that Jesus doesn't write these long economic tracts, so there's nothing we really can glean from the Gospels. But if you think about this, and Bud and I have, when we've had the chance to teach this together, you look at what Jesus said, and Bud, this is in Luke, right, after he sort of reads, or is this in Mark? Yeah, go ahead.
No, this is Luke 4. When Jesus first enters the synagogue at the start of his ministry, and he reads from Isaiah, and Bo gets into what you're saying, because one of the signs of the coming kingdom is freedom for prisoners. But then our Lord says, and he's there to proclaim the year of our Lord, and the students oftentimes have no context for that phrase, but it's really a kind of radical claim. You're talking about the Jubilee year, right?
Yeah, the Jubilee year from the Old Testament, where, this is in the Torah, this is even before the prophets. The idea is okay, so we all know Sabbath day. The Jews had Sabbath years, right? So every 7 years where they weren't supposed to plan anything. And then 7 times 7 is 49. On the 50th year, they were supposed to erase all debt between and amongst all of the Jewish people. And then, there's huge controversies. Did they ever do this, et cetera, et cetera? But when Jesus then says, this has been fulfilled and you're hearing it, he's saying that the kingdom of God is all about this idea of setting prisoners free and erasing these things that we hold over other people. Now, I'm not acting like that this means that from that passage alone we have an economic theory, but certainly we have to start asking ourselves that if our Lord thought by his sheer reading from the prophet Isaiah is fulfilled, he is the Jubilee year, what is that going to make us think about when we think about our brothers and sisters that are suffering under these things? I'm guessing at the Consumer Law conference you don't get to talk about Luke 4 too much, Gabriel.
No, not really, though. He was an attorney there. I actually had some time to speak with. He's from a very small town in northern Michigan. Actually, his website is www.biblebelievingattorney.com.
Nice.
And he actually sees his mission as, he's evangelical, but he sees his mission as very much tied up with his strong biblical roots. And it was interesting speaking to him, obviously from a different perspective, but there was some theological convergence there about why we do what we do.
I think the what I'm getting at, Bud, you jump in here when we need to. If we're going to start talking about how something as practical as debt collection, and how we help people out, if it's been in the shadows, what is a good way for us to bring this up so that people feel comfortable enough to even start broaching topics that we act like are too hot button to even touch?
For my part, I think one thing that maybe on a very practical level, and unfortunately this isn't coming from a Catholic parish here in Grand Rapids, it's actually coming from a larger evangelical parish, but, they have an entire program set up just to help people who are dealing with debt, and all, not just debt in terms of getting, credit cards to buy new iPhones, but people who get saddled with medical bills and so forth. And what they're trying to do is open up this reality that, yes, debt it's hard, it makes people's lives difficult, but it's not a sort of black stain on their soul. It doesn't make them untouchable or somehow deserving of marginalization, but actually sets up a way for, people to get themselves out of debt, to counsel them on ways to avoid debt in the future, to handle the debts that they have. And I think that those are all really great programs. I do think that people need to also consider the fact that when people are struggling with debt, there's a lot of emotional and psychological and social pressure that's put upon them, and to sort of reach out with a compassionate arm. No, maybe we don't always have the money to, pay off somebody's debts for them automatically, but we certainly can be in a position to be compassionate and be understanding towards them and help them through a trying time rather than, being in a position of judgment or looking down our nose upon them.
Gabriel, what you don't realize is, Bo, with that last comment, like really the background to what he was saying is he's hoping that his school loans get remitted sometime soon here. That's mainly how he votes for president.
Yeah, this is just this really long setup to being like, no, I'm kidding, go ahead.
Do you, Gabriel, I know that popes across the years have commented on these topics. Do you have an opinion on, like if our listeners want to go to read something about the sort of topics we're discussing, what's a great place to start? And then, like, our recent church engagements with this topic, do you feel like they're just as strong as what came in the past, or is it sort of like, stick with Leo the 13th on these questions?
I do actually believe that for all of the controversies and arguments that are out there about the nature of the church's magisterium over, the last century or so, that when it comes to social teaching, the social magisterium of the church has been remarkably in continuity with each other. I do think there have been points in time in more recent years with either Pope Francis or even John the 23rd before him may have used some terminology that sort of lends itself to being castigated as quote-unquote socialist. I don't think that's necessarily true, but certainly for certain opponents of Catholic social teaching, it's sort of opened the door of criticism. If people are out there to really want to look at these issues, and a good place to start, yes, you can go to Leo the 13th's Rerum Novarum, Pius XI's Quadragesimo Anno, but I would actually also recommend a book by a fellow lawyer who actually has run into some controversy lately, but there's a great book by Brian McCall, who teaches at Oklahoma Law, and it's called To Build the City of God. Now, there's some parts of the book which, I disagree with, but the parts of it on economics and Catholic social teaching are absolutely outstanding. They're very accessible. They really frame the issues in a way that's both intelligent, but like I said, also intuitable by your average layman. And it's a really good place to start rethinking through economic problems, rethinking through economic realities like debt in a way that's more consistently Catholic.
Well, one that I would throw out to people to dwell on, and we're getting ready to be done, so I throw this out. We look and we ask, like, why aren't more men becoming priests? Why aren't more women becoming sisters and nuns? And I'm denying that part of this is a spiritual reality and distractions in the modern world, et cetera, et cetera. But I do know this for a case. I know multiple people who one of the biggest struggles they had joining religious life is getting out of debt. And I mean, like, they're 21-year-olds, and getting out of debt was like something they had to work at 2-3 years, or had to rely on the auspices of someone or an organization, paying for it on their behalf. And that's just student debt. They've taken debts to help their parents. This is especially the case when you talk about people who come from poorer classes, which, to be quite frank, is where a lot of religious have come from throughout the centuries. If you're thinking that, again, this sounds like just one more way in which people are trying to get out of their debts or things like that, think about that if we have a problem where we don't have enough vocations, think about how hard it is that people are not pursuing vocations because of debt. Or think about people who aren't getting married because of debt. Or people who feel like in order to get married, they must go into huge debts to have weddings. And you start seeing this debt is around the corner for so many people. And so I don't think you have to think about this in terms of Democrat and Republican. Just dwell on that if young people wanted to go into the religious life, for so many of them, debt prevents them to do that. And if that's the case, certainly that means we need to at least be willing as a church to think much more deeply about what's going on here.
I agree, absolutely. And I also think, too, that you have to keep in mind that, again, some of these debts that people accrue, they have paid them off. And I want to keep it just one little point. They have paid them off, but it's the interest, it's the fees, it's the collection fees that end up making it impossible to actually get out from underneath it.
And that starts to be it, is, when we think about I think about my debts, and I'm doing fine. So I don't want to have. Bud was making the joke earlier, but I do think, right, that like if I didn't have the interest that I'm paying on, even for people who me that can't complain, like if I wasn't paying those monthly debts, those are things that I could actually donate. And again, this is not like cry me a river, Bo. This just starts to be a reality. We all really do have these things that hang over us, and when they hang over you, it makes it where it's harder to then divest yourself to alms, right? Like I could pay $20 a month instead of this card or whatever that I have, and I don't know. I think we're getting to the end here, but I almost think it's that debt has become so ubiquitous. It's like we don't talk about it because it's like air we're breathing. And if that's the case, Gabriel, I think that might be commentary in and of itself enough of the position that we're in.
I agree 100%. I mean, it really has become commonplace. And just not to end this on a dire note, but just to give you a sense of where things may be going. I mean, consumer debt in this country is at an all-time high. Household debt is at an all-time high. Bankruptcies are at an all-time low right now. And so the rubber band's going to snap back, and it's going to be, I think, very, very hard when the next sort of downturn happens in our society. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to be on the bad end of things. And, I hope it doesn't turn out that way, but that's what the forecast is looking like right now.
Well, before we let you go, where would people be able to go? Do you have any sort of, I know you're in Michigan, so like you can't like represent our Iowa fan base or the Oklahoma one. Maybe in Oklahoma anybody can represent people. Who knows what Oklahoma law is like. But what are places that people can go look for resources if they indeed are struggling with issues of debt?
The first place I would say for anyone to look at is the National Association of Consumer Advocates. I believe the website's www.consumeradvocates.org. I am a member of it. You can go on there and do an attorney search, and you can actually subdivide by state and actually the issue that you're dealing with, whether it's student loans, whether it's just regular debt collection, maybe you've been defrauded on a car warranty, anything under the sun that's consumer protection you can find there. And I would definitely recommend an attorney from that organization, or at least look there first in your area, because we all tend to be on the same page. We share information with each other nationwide. We know the sort of tactics that debt collectors and other unscrupulous creditors use. And again, that's the first place I would go to. Another resource, really quickly, is my own law firm. It's actually pronounced Maul, not Mail. But sorry. It's not correct. It's okay. But the website is www.maullaw.com. That's MAULLAW.com. I blog on there about debt and consumer issues, so that might be a good place to get some general information out there. But certainly, any of your listeners, no matter what state you're in, feel free to get a hold of me. Feel free to contact me. I know lawyers all over the country. I'm sure I can put them in touch with somebody who can help.
Well, Gabriel, thank you so much. Gabriel Sanchez, editor for Angelus Press and an attorney for the Maul Law Group in Grand Rapids, Michigan, all-star of the Uncommon Good. Gabriel, it's great to have you back. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Thank you, and God bless you both.
Yep, God bless.
Thanks, Gabriel. Yep.
Well, Bud, other than you outing me on the show that I have debt. No, I think the sad thing is I feel like we could have an hour-long show about everybody who has a degree in the humanities and just cynical laughs about how much we owe people things.
Well, that's why I didn't feel like I was throwing you under the bus, because I feel like if you talk about a circle of friends in the late 30s, that it's pretty much like 95% of us that are still paying off student loans.
Yeah, I see people with non-graduate degrees like having that they own their house and they paid off their this, that, and the other, and I'm all like, So when Gabriel threw out his retirement plan as death, he's like, no, I'm just kidding, and I'm all like, well, my retirement plan is that I was joking around is I'm trying to keep having children until one of them looks like the business major.
That's right. That's one way to do it. If you're talking about God sort of like pressing us to become detached from what we have, like now that I'm up to 6 kids, I can't really, like the American plan is like I have my retirement nest egg and then I have money set aside for my kids to go to school. And I'm starting to tell them that like religious vocations is really their only route at this point.
Yeah, for the school stuff. The whole other thing with this, but like we're looking about like wills and durable power of attorney and like all the stuff like that, and I'm all like, have fun with the $20, kids. So
don't spend it all in one place.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, this is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts and our families, our city, state, nation, the entire world, galaxy. The Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week. Well, Bud, we kind of ran a little long on time, but just to say, Christ Our Life Conference happened a few weeks ago. It's fantastic. It was wonderful. We have a ladies' mosaic luncheon happening on the 11th, which is tomorrow. Like I said, we have Faith and Healing October 18th at Mercy College. If you want to sign up, reserve a spot, not that you have to reserve, but it helps us with knowing food. It's mchs.edu/faith and healing. And then we have Carathon next week. So, I know that we've talked about debt and money, but one of the ways that we give alms is, I think, a place here. You join this ministry, and we help get the word of Jesus Christ out and about through walls 24/7. Anything else you want to bring up, Bud, about highlights that people can listen to through the show throughout the week?
Yeah, certainly. I would encourage our listeners to tune in next week, and we always try to remind folks that this is a nonprofit and that we survive off the basis of their generous donations. But every day here on Iowa Catholic Radio, you can start your day out 5 a.m. with Scripture, 5:30 with the Rosary, and then at night again, 9:30 p.m., pray the Rosary. Then Father Andrew has a Gospel reflection.
Well, folks, this is the Uncommon Good. I say next week we'll be back. Next week is Carathon, like I said. So we will have a show, but mostly be talking about Carathon type things. But then after that, we'll get back with regular guests. And thank you for supporting our show. This is the Uncommon Good. For Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.